Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights guarantees every person the freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. Yet today, that baseline protection is actively disappearing. For 64.7% of the global population, the right to live according to one's conscience is severely restricted, compromised, or entirely gone. The 2025 Religious Freedom in the World report, published by Aid to the Church in Need, provides the data to understand this collapse. By tracking systemic violations affecting all faith groups across 196 countries, it offers an objective framework for analyzing global repression. This heat map visualizes the 62 countries experiencing severe violations. We organize these into a strict taxonomy. 38 nations face structural discrimination, and 24 are under active persecution. Translated into demographics, the human cost is clear. This deterioration affects nearly 5.4 billion people worldwide. This widespread erosion is not a coincidence or a series of isolated local conflicts. It is systematically driven by three distinct geopolitical vectors. Analyzing this crisis requires an architectural model, one that maps how these individual events connect into a unified global system of repression. The first and largest vector is state authoritarianism. Autocratic regimes are the primary driver of severe persecution in 19 countries, and they enforce structural discrimination in 33 others. These regimes suppress religious life through strict legal and bureaucratic control. By dominating all public institutions, the state ensures no competing ideology can organize or operate freely. The historical blueprint for this is the Cuban model. Established in 1959, it relies on total subordination of religious identity to a single ruling party, treating the church as a threat to the state. Decades later, an exact framework of covert repression, intense surveillance, and legal deterrence is actively exported and applied in nations like Venezuela and Nicaragua. Authoritarianism has also evolved. Regimes are now weaponizing artificial intelligence and integrating it into advanced digital surveillance networks. These digital tools allow governments to monitor and profile citizens continuously, penalizing unauthorized religious expression in real time. In countries like China and Iran, the state uses this technology to classify private religious belief as an active national security threat. Modern autocracies no longer rely solely on physical police forces. They engineer the removal of religion from the public sphere to guarantee absolute ideological monopoly. The second vector is ethno-religious nationalism. This occurs when a state defines its national identity exclusively by a single majority religion. Particularly in South and Southeast Asia, governments weaponize this majoritarian narrative to strip away the legal and social rights of minority faith communities. This flowchart models a dynamic called hybrid persecution. It traces an escalating cycle where formal legal discrimination feeds into outright civilian hostility. When administrative systems legally classify minorities as second-class citizens, it signals tacit state approval for civilian mobs to attack those communities without consequence. We see this mechanism clearly in Pakistan. The country's strict blasphemy laws are frequently weaponized against religious minorities, usually triggered by entirely unverified accusations. Consider the case of a Christian woman named Miriam. A mob, spurred by false blasphemy claims, surrounded her family's home, smashing through the walls and setting fire to their adjacent shoe factory. While the family hid for hours, waiting for delayed police intervention, Miriam's grandfather was beaten to death by the mob. The physical damage to the property could be repaired, but the violence permanently destroyed the family's generational stability and legacy. Hybrid persecution operates efficiently because the state's structural discrimination practically guarantees absolute impunity for those who carry out the physical violence. The third vector requires correcting a widespread analytical misconception. The collapse of the Islamic State's territorial caliphate did not eliminate the transnational jihadist threat. Instead, the destruction of ISIS in 2019 forced an evolutionary adaptation. Extremist operations shifted their focus away from the Middle East. This network map tracks that decentralization. Extremist networks radiated outward from Syria and Iraq, establishing autonomous regional affiliates in Africa and Afghanistan. The African continent, specifically the Sahel and Central Africa, has now emerged as the deadliest center of gravity for global jihadist activity. These networks operate by exploiting local economic grievances and weak state governance to build their own quasi-state structures. On the ground, heavily armed militants deploy overwhelming decentralized force to assert control over vulnerable rural populations. Their insurgency operates on a strict sectarian logic. They carry out systematic, violent attacks against Christian minorities, as well as Muslims who refuse to accept their extremist ideology. Meanwhile, other affiliates like ISKP in Afghanistan fulfill a different strategic role, projecting transnational reach by executing high-level terror operations abroad. Modern jihadism survives as a resilient, franchised insurgency that expands rapidly wherever state protection fails. The architecture of persecution serves as a primary engine for the global displacement crisis, forcing 123 million people into flight worldwide. Religiously motivated violence and discrimination act as a primary structural driver pushing millions to flee their ancestral homelands. In sub-Saharan Africa, militant Islamist attacks have uprooted millions across Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. Targeted violence forces entire communities to abandon their homes and seek safety in emergency asylum situations. When we look at the Middle East and South Asia, this mass displacement results in permanent demographic erasure. This Sankey diagram visualizes the scale of that demographic depletion. In Syria, the Christian population has fallen from 10% to roughly 2%. In Afghanistan, a population of 700,000 Hindus and Sikhs has dropped to under 100. This process strips away centuries of history, permanently altering the identity of these nations and eliminating their religious diversity entirely. This mass exodus operates as an engine, permanently dismantling historical religious pluralism on a global scale. The collapse of religious freedom is not contained to the developing world. As geopolitical conflicts escalate, the spillover effects directly impact Western democracies. Following the October 2023 conflict in the Holy Land, localized hostility across OSCE nations spiked sharply, driven by global tensions. Europe and North America recorded severe, sudden increases in both anti-Semitic hate crimes and anti-Muslim incidents. This hostility also extends to a sharp rise in anti-Christian incidents across Western nations, documented through widespread church vandalism, targeted arson, and physical assaults. These incidents are driven by a mix of ideological hostility and militant activism, compounded by inadequate government responses that leave communities vulnerable. All of this points to a single overarching geopolitical reality. Religious freedom is a foundational bedrock of stable societies. When the architecture of religious freedom fails, the result is systemic injustice, forced migration, and regional collapse.